My name is Rosie Thompson, and at 73 years old, I've learned that life's biggest surprises don't always come wrapped in pretty packages. After 35 years teaching third grade in our small Georgia town, I thought I'd seen it all, but nothing prepared me for what happened last spring with my son Marcus and the woman who would become my daughter-in-law, Tubo. I remember sitting in my sunroom, the morning light filtering through my prized peace lily collection, when my phone lit up with Marcus's face, my only child, my pride and joy, calling on a Tuesday morning. "Mama," he said, his voice carrying that hint of excitement I hadn't heard since he was a little boy, showing me his straight-A report cards. "I'm engaged to Sarah." Before I tell you my story, let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and if you enjoy stories like this, please like and subscribe. It helps me keep sharing more. She came from money, worked in tech, and had this way of looking at you like she was calculating something behind those green eyes. I'd only met her twice before the engagement announcement, both times at restaurants where the menu prices made my teacher's pension feel mighty small. But Marcus loved her, and I wanted to love her too. That's what mothers do. We adjust, we adapt, we make room. So I smiled through my concerns and started planning how I'd help with the wedding. I even pulled out my grandmother's pearl necklace, thinking it might make a beautiful something borrowed for the bride. What would you have done if your only son announced his engagement to someone you barely knew? Sarah never answered my calls directly, always texting back hours later with short replies. Marcus seemed different too, distracted, almost nervous when I'd bring up wedding plans. But I told myself I was being an overprotective mama, seeing shadows where there weren't any. Then came that Sunday afternoon in April. I'd driven over to Marcus's house, bringing my famous peach cobbler as a peace offering, hoping to finally sit down with Sarah and talk about wedding dates. The driveway was empty, but I had a key, had always had one since Marcus bought the place 5 years ago. The house felt different. There were boxes in the living room, some labeled donations, others storage. My heart started beating faster when I saw Marcus's prized football trophies from high school packed away. Something wasn't right. I found them in the backyard. Marcus and Sarah sitting on the deck with papers spread across the table between them. They both looked up when the screen door creaked. And that's when I saw it. The gold band already on Sarah's finger, catching the afternoon light like an accusation. "When's the wedding?" I asked, my voice smaller than I meant it to be. The cobbler suddenly heavy in my hand. Sarah smiled that calculating smile of hers, and said the words that would change everything. "We got married yesterday. But tell me, should I have seen this coming? The signs were there, weren't they? The distance, the unanswered calls, the strange tension in Marcus's voice, yet nothing could have prepared me for the truth, or for what I discovered next in those papers scattered across the deck table." The cobbler slipped from my fingers, the glass dish shattering on the wooden deck. But it wasn't just my dish that broke that day. Standing there in my son's backyard, I realized this was only the beginning of a betrayal that ran deeper than a secret wedding, one that would force me to choose between being a good mother and standing up for everything I believed in. What would you do if your child excluded you from one of the most important days of their life? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and subscribe to hear what happened next in this story that still keeps me awake at night. The sound of that breaking cobbler dish still echoes in my memory, like a starting gun for everything that followed. As I stood there on that deck, pieces of glass and peaches scattered at my feet, Sarah's words hung in the air between us. "We got married yesterday." As Marcus jumped up, his chair scraping against the wood. "Mama, I can explain," he said, but his voice had that same tone from when he was 12, and I caught him stealing money from my purse, guilty, but not sorry enough. I couldn't stop staring at those papers on the table. Legal documents. From what I could see, property deeds, bank statements, and something else that made my blood run cold. Retirement account transfers. My teacher's instincts, honed over 3 decades of spotting trouble before it fully formed, started ringing alarm bells. "The wedding was just a formality," Sarah said, gathering the papers with practiced efficiency. "We've been planning this move for months." Her voice was smooth as honey, but her eyes were cold as winter rain. Move. The word felt foreign in my mouth. Marcus had never mentioned any move. For those watching who've ever had the ground disappear beneath their feet, You know that moment when your world shifts and nothing makes sense anymore. Drop a comment below if you've ever experienced something similar. We're relocating to Seattle, Marcus said, not quite meeting my eye. Sarah's company offered her a promotion. It's an incredible opportunity. The Amique Seattle, 3,000 miles away. My son, who'd never lived more than 20 minutes from my house, was moving across the country, and he'd gotten married without telling me. I steadied myself against the deck railing, feeling the rough wood under my palm. The afternoon sun suddenly felt too bright, too harsh. When was all I could manage to ask. Next week, Sarah answered before Marcus could speak. The movers are coming on Thursday, 5 days away. My mind raced back to all those boxes I'd seen inside. They weren't just organizing, they were packing to leave. Were you going to tell me at all? I asked Marcus. But Sarah answered again. Of course we were, Rosie. We just wanted everything finalized first. You understand, don't you? Sometimes it's easier to ask forgiveness than permission. That's when I noticed something else. The pearl necklace I'd been saving, my grandmother's pearls, was around Sarah's neck. She must have seen me looking because she touched it almost possessively. Marcus gave it to me as a wedding gift, she said. He mentioned it was just sitting in your jewelry box. The pearls my mama had worn to her wedding, the ones I'd worn to mine, the ones I'd planned to give Sarah myself, as a way of welcoming her to our family properly. Those weren't Marcus's to give, I said quietly, my teacher voice slipping out. The one I used when a student had crossed a serious line. Marcus finally looked at me then. Really looked at me, and for a moment I saw something like shame cross his face. But Sarah's hand found his arm, and whatever moment of clarity he'd had vanished. They're just pearls, Mama, he said. And they look beautiful on Sarah. Just pearls. Just a wedding. Just a move across the country. Just my only child slipping away without even a goodbye. I looked down at the ruined cobbler, at the dark stain it was leaving on the deck. I should clean this up, I said, more to myself than to them. But when I bent down, my hands were shaking too badly to pick up the glass. Don't worry about it, Sarah said, already standing. We'll take care of it. You should probably go home and process all this. We have so much packing to do anyway. Dismissed. In my son's backyard, by a woman who'd married him in secret, wearing my family's pearls. Earlier that week, I'd received a call from my old friend Betty at the bank. She'd seen something concerning and wanted to check if I knew about it. I hadn't understood then, but standing there on that deck, watching Sarah gather those papers, it all started making terrible sense. Do you think I was too forgiving, standing there letting them dismiss me like that? Should I have demanded answers right then and there? I left that day with my heart in pieces, but my mind was already working. In my 35 years of teaching, I'd learned that sometimes the quietest students were the ones plotting the biggest trouble, and sometimes the sweetest smiles hid the sharpest teeth. As I drove home, my rearview mirror full of my son's shrinking house, I made a decision. I might be 73, but I wasn't too old to fight for what was right, and I certainly wasn't too old to protect my son, even if he didn't know he needed protecting, because what I discovered when I got home and made a few phone calls would change everything. Drop a comment below and subscribe if you want to know what happened next. Because believe me, this story is far from over, and those pearls around Sarah's neck, they weren't the only family treasure she had her eyes on. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee going cold, and a stack of papers that made my stomach turn. Betty from the bank had come by early, breaking all sorts of rules to show me what she'd found. 30 years of friendship meant something in our small town, more than banking regulations anyway. Look at these transactions, Rosie, Betty said, her finger tracing down a line of numbers. Starting 3 months ago, right when Sarah came into the picture, Marcus has been moving money around, liquidating assets, even taking out a second mortgage on his house. I remembered my son at 8 years old, proudly depositing his allowance into his first savings account. The teller had given him a lollipop, and he declared he was going to be rich someday. Now here I was, watching his financial life unravel in neat rows of black and white. If you've ever had that gut feeling that something wasn't right, drop a comment below. Sometimes a mother's intuition is worth more than all the facts in the world. There's more, Betty whispered, though we were alone in my house. Sarah's been named beneficiary on every insurance policies, retirement accounts. Even the house deed has been modified. And Rosie? She hesitated, pushing another document across the table. She's got quite a history of this. My hands shook as I read the report. 3 previous marriages in the last decade, each ending within a year, leaving Sarah significantly wealthier. My son wasn't her first target. He was just the latest. The pearl necklace around her neck flashed in my memory, and suddenly it felt like more than just a family heirloom she'd take. It was a symbol of everything she planned to steal. I reached for my phone to call Marcus, but Betty's hand stopped me. Think carefully, Rosie. People like Sarah, they're prepared for direct confrontation. They have answers ready, explanations that make you sound crazy for even asking questions. She was right. I'd seen that calculating look in Sarah's eyes, heard the smooth way she controlled conversations. Going in with accusations blazing would only push Marcus further away. What I don't understand, I said, is why the rush? Why get married secretly and move across the country so quickly? Betty slid one final document across the table. Because of this, Marcus's company is about to go public. In 6 months, his stock options will be worth millions. Sarah must have found out somehow. Somehow. For those watching who think love is blind, sometimes it's not blindness, it's sleight of hand. A magician's trick where you're so busy watching the right hand you don't see what the left is doing. I spent the rest of that day making calls, calling in favors from old students who'd grown up to become lawyers, private investigators, even one who worked in cybersecurity. Being a teacher for 35 years meant I had former students in almost every profession, and in a small town like ours, loyalty runs deep. By sunset I had a plan. Not a perfect one, but as I always told my 3rd graders, sometimes you have to work with what you've got. I drove to Marcus's house that evening, watching the movers load box after box into their truck. Sarah was directing them with military precision, while Marcus looked lost in his own front yard. Just came to say goodbye, I called out, forcing a smile. And to give you both a wedding present. Sarah's eyes lit up, just for a second, but I caught it. That flash of greed she couldn't quite hide. The envelope I handed her contained what looked like bank statements, property deeds, and investment accounts, all in my name, all showing significant amounts, all completely fake. Thanks to my former student, who now worked in digital forensics. I want you to have everything, I said, watching Sarah's eyes scan the documents. Your family now, after all. Marcus looked confused. Mama, you don't have to. Oh, but I want to. I interrupted, meeting Sarah's gaze. Family means sharing everything, doesn't it? No secrets, no lies. Something flickered across Sarah's face, recognition maybe, or warning. She knew I knew, and I knew she knew. But we both smiled anyway, playing our parts. As should I have felt guilty, setting my trap? Maybe. But as I drove away that night watching Sarah clutch that envelope of fake documents, I remembered what my mama always said. Sometimes you have to fight fire with fire. But here's what Sarah didn't know. What she couldn't have known. Those documents weren't just fake, they were bait. And sometimes when you're fishing for sharks, you have to let them bite first. What would you have done? Would you have let your child move across the country with someone you knew was dangerous? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Because what happened next, in those final days before their planned move, would prove that sometimes the quietest revenge is the most effective. And those pearls around Sarah's neck, they were about to become the least of her worries. Stay tuned and subscribe to hear how this all ends. Because believe me, nobody saw what was coming next. Not Sarah, not Marcus, and certainly not the authorities who were already taking a very keen interest in Sarah's previous marriages. 2 days before Marcus and Sarah's planned departure for Seattle, I sat in a downtown coffee shop across from Detective James Wilson, another one of my former 3rd grade students. He'd been that quiet boy who always stayed in during recess to read mystery novels. Now 20 years later he was showing me moves that made those childhood mysteries look like bedtime stories. We've been building a case against Sarah Mitchell, or should I say Sarah Thompson, or Sarah Davidson, or Sarah Winters, James said, laying out 3 marriage certificates. Each marriage followed the same pattern: quick courtship, rushed wedding, rapid financial transfers, and then a convenient tragedy. And then, my hands gripped my coffee cup tighter. Tragedy. The second fell down a flight of stairs. The third. He paused, sliding another photo across the table. Let's just say they all had excellent life insurance policies. If you're wondering why I didn't go straight to Marcus with this information, let me know in the comments. Sometimes protecting someone means keeping them in the dark just a little longer. And then, none of the deaths could be proven suspicious, James continued, but the pattern caught our attention. We just never had enough evidence to move forward until now. He pulled out the envelope of fake documents I'd given Sarah. Your little financial honey trap worked perfectly. She's been making calls, lots of them, to some very interesting people. People we've been watching for insurance fraud and money laundering. The coffee shop's bell chimed as new customers entered, and I found myself checking to make sure it wasn't Sarah or Marcus. Paranoia had become my constant companion these past few days. What about my son? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Is he safe? James reached across the table, covering my hand with his. We have officers watching him 24/7. But here's the thing, Mrs. Thompson. We need him to be exactly where he is for another 48 hours. Can you handle that? Could I handle knowing my son was living with someone who might be planning his death? Someone who'd already possibly killed 3 other husbands? The teacher in me wanted to march right over there and pull Marcus out of that house. But the mother in me knew better. Sometimes love means playing the long game. That's something else you should know, James said, pulling out one final document. Those stock options from Marcus's company. Sarah's already tried to transfer them to an offshore account. The paperwork is dated for the day after they're supposed to arrive in Seattle. To my heart clenched. In my mind I saw Marcus at his college graduation, full of dreams about his tech startup, all those late nights, all that hard work, about to be stolen by a woman who'd married him for his future. And I hadn't spent 35 years teaching children to stand up to bullies just to back down now. That evening I drove to Marcus's house one last time. Sarah answered the door, wearing my mother's pearls like they belonged to her. I forgot to include something in those documents, I said, holding out another envelope. The family trust fund. I want you both to have access to it before you leave. Behind her I could see Marcus packing his home office. Each box felt like another nail in what could be his coffin if we didn't stop this now. But I insist, I said, stepping inside. In fact, I was hoping we could go to the bank together tomorrow, sign everything over properly. For a moment, something dark crossed Sarah's face, a flash of the predator beneath the pleasant mask. But it passed so quickly, I might have missed it if I hadn't been looking for it. Of course, she said. What time? We set the meeting for 10 a.m. the next morning. As I left, I heard Sarah on the phone, her voice low and urgent. Everything was going according to plan. But tell me, would you have been able to sleep that night, knowing what was coming? Knowing that the next day would either save your child or put them in even more danger? Because what happened at that bank meeting would change everything. And those pearls that Sarah had taken, they were about to become evidence in something much bigger than family jewelry. Drop a comment below if you want to know how this ends, and subscribe for the final chapter, because sometimes justice comes not with a bang but with a whisper. And sometimes the best revenge is letting someone walk right into their own trap. The next morning would bring either salvation or devastation. And as I lay awake that night, watching the clock tick toward dawn, I prayed I'd made the right choice. Because when you're playing chess with someone who's playing murder, there's no room for second chances. Stay tuned for the final chapter, where everything comes to a head. And remember, a mother's love isn't just about protecting her children. Sometimes it's about saving them from themselves. The bank lobby felt too quiet that morning as I sat waiting for Sarah, my hand smoothed over my dress, the same one I'd worn to Marcus's college graduation. It seemed fitting, somehow. Both days were about my son's future, just in very different ways. At precisely 10 a.m., Sarah walked in, pearls gleaming at her throat. But she wasn't alone. Marcus was with her, looking confused and slightly annoyed. My heart skipped. This wasn't part of the plan. "I hope you don't mind," Sarah said, her smile sharp as a razor. "I thought Marcus should be here for this. Family trust and all. Have you ever had your carefully laid plans suddenly shift? Drop a comment below. Sometimes the most dangerous moments are when we have to improvise." Betty, my friend from the bank, led us to a private conference room. Through the glass walls I could see Detective James and his team, positioned as regular customers, watching and waiting. Everything hinged on the next few minutes. "Before we start," Sarah said, pulling out her own envelope, "I have some concerns about the documentation you provided earlier." Her eyes met mine, challenging. Some interesting discrepancies. Of course she'd checked. Of course she'd found problems with the fake document. She hadn't survived 3 previous husbands by being careless. "Yombero, what discrepancies?" Marcus asked, looking between us. That's when Sarah made her first mistake. She opened her envelope, spreading out papers that showed her own investigation into my finances, real bank statement, property records, and most importantly, evidence of her own fraudulent activities she'd accidentally revealed while trying to prove me wrong. Your mother isn't being honest with us, Marcus," Sarah said, her voice gentle but accusing. "These trust fund documents she showed us, they're fake. All of it's fake. She's trying to manipulate us into staying." Marcus turned to me, hurt in his eyes. "Mama, is this true?" The room felt too small suddenly, the weight of 35 years of teaching honesty and integrity to children pressing down on me. "Yes," I said simply. "The documents were fake." Sarah's triumphant smile lasted exactly 3 seconds, until Detective James walked in, followed by 2 other officers. "Sarah Mitchell," he said. "Or should I say Sarah Davidson Winters Thompson. Thank you for bringing all this evidence together in one place for us. It makes the warrant much easier to execute." The change in Sarah's face was like watching a mask crack. Her hand went to her throat, clutching my mother's pearl. "Marcus," she started, but my son had already stepped away from her, realization dawning in his eyes. "The stock options," he whispered. "The offshore accounts. It wasn't a mistake in the paperwork, was it?" "Son," I said softly. "She's done this before. 3 times. The next few minutes were a blur of activity. Sarah being read her rights, evidence being collected, Marcus standing frozen, watching his new wife being handcuffed in the same bank where he'd opened his first savings account. "The pearls," I said to one of the officers. "They're evidence too. Family heirlooms taken under false pretenses." Sarah's face contorted as they made her surrender the necklace. In that moment, she looked nothing like the polished woman who'd smiled her way into our lives. She looked like what she truly was, a predator caught in her own trap. The Pendo as they led her away, she turned back once. "Marcus, baby, don't let them do this. Your mother set me up. She's the one who's been lying." Bet Marcus wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the papers on the table, evidence of her previous marriages, the suspicious deaths, the financial fraud. His hands trembled as he picked up their marriage certificate, dated just days ago. "I would have given you everything," he said, his voice breaking. "You didn't have to steal it. For those watching who think love conquers all, sometimes love needs a little help from the truth. And sometimes the truth hurts before it heals." Later that evening, Marcus and I sat on my front porch, 2 cups of sweet tea getting warm in the Georgia night. The moving trucks had been canceled, the Seattle plans abandoned. "How did you know?" he finally asked. I told him everything about Betty's warning, about the pattern Sarah had left behind, about the community of former students who'd helped protect one of their own. "Love makes us blind sometimes," I said, "but it shouldn't make us stupid." "I'm sorry about the pearls," he whispered. "About everything." I reached over and took his hand, the same hand I'd held when he took his first steps, when he graduated, when he started his company. Family jewelry can be replaced, I said. You can't, have ya? So here I sit, a year later telling this story. Sarah's facing charges not just for fraud, but for the suspicious deaths of her previous husbands. Marcus is healing, focusing on his company which did indeed go public. And those pearls? They're back in my jewelry box, waiting for the right time. The right person. Have ya? What lesson do you see here? Tell me in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories about love, betrayal, and the sometimes surprising ways justice finds its mark. Because in the end, it wasn't just about saving my son from a black widow. It was about showing him that sometimes the quietest voice in the room, the one that belongs to your mama, might just be the one you need to hear the most. And those pearls, they're not just jewelry anymore. They're a reminder that sometimes the most valuable things we possess aren't things at all. They're the wisdom to know the difference between love and deception, and the courage to fight for those we love, even when they don't know they need saving. 6 months after Sarah's arrest, I found myself back in that same courtroom, but this time I wasn't alone. The wooden benches were filled with faces I recognized, wives, children, and parents of Sarah's previous husband. We'd formed an unexpected support group, bound together by the threads of shared trauma and the determination to see justice served. The prosecution had built an airtight case. Those fake documents I'd created hadn't just exposed Sarah's current schemes. They'd unraveled a decade of carefully constructed lies. Each financial transaction she'd made trying to verify my non-existent trust fund had led investigators to more evidence of her past crime. If you've ever wondered about the power of a mother's intuition, leave a comment below. Sometimes the most powerful weapon we have is simply trusting our gut. Marcus sat beside me, his hand occasionally squeezing mine when testimony became particularly difficult to hear. He'd aged somehow in these past months, but not in a way that broke my heart. No, my son had grown wiser, stronger. Sometimes the hardest lessons leave us better for the learning. I'll rise, the bailiff called out, and we stood as Sarah was led in. She'd traded my mother's pearls for an orange jumpsuit, but she still held herself like royalty. Even facing 3 consecutive life sentences, she maintained that calculating poise I'd noticed the very first time we'd met. The judge, a stern woman with silver hair, adjusted her glasses as she reviewed the verdict. Sarah Mitchell Davidson Winters Thompson, she began, each name falling like a hammer blow. You stand convicted of multiple counts of fraud, financial exploitation, and 3 counts of first-degree murder. For just a moment, that mask slipped, and I saw something I recognized from my teaching days. The look of a child caught in a lie too big to escape. Later that evening, Marcus and I sat in my kitchen, sharing a fresh peach cobbler, the first I'd made since that day on his death. You know what's strange, Mama? He said, pushing his dessert around the plate. I keep thinking about those fake documents you made, how something false ended up revealing so much truth. Sometimes, I replied, you have to set a little fire to smoke out the smoke. For those watching who've had to make difficult choices to protect the ones you love, you understand that sometimes the right path isn't always the straight one. The doorbell rang, interrupting our conversation. Standing on my porch was James, Detective Wilson, holding a familiar velvet box. Thought you might want these back, he said, handing me my mother's pearls. They're no longer needed as evidence. Marcus watched as I opened the box, the pearls still gleaming despite everything they'd witnessed. You know, he said slowly, I never did hear the story of how these pearls came into our family. I smiled, touching them gently. Well, that's a story worth telling. I sat back in my chair, the pearls in my lap, and began to share the tale of my grandmother, a woman who'd faced her own battles with the same quiet strength I'd needed to face Sarah. The pearls became a symbol of something new for us, not just of family tradition, but of survival, of wisdom passed down through generations. Sometimes the most precious heirlooms are the lessons they help us learn. 2 weeks later, I received letters from the families of Sarah's previous victims. Each one shared stories of their loved ones, of lives cut short by greed and manipulation. We'd formed an unexpected fellowship, healing together, supporting each other through the aftermath of Sarah's destruction. Marcus threw himself into creating a foundation, using some of his company's IPO money to help victims of financial fraud and domestic abuse. Every story needs a silver lining, Mama, he told me. This is ours. This is ours. For those wondering if there's life after betrayal, let me assure you, there is. Sometimes the broken places heal stronger than before. Yesterday, Marcus brought home someone new, a quiet woman with kind eyes and honest laughter. She admired the pearls when she saw them displayed in my china cabinet, but she didn't reach for them. Instead, she asked about their story, eager to learn our family's history. Marcus caught my eye across the room, and I saw in his smile that he'd learned to look deeper than surface shine. Sometimes the most valuable things in life aren't the ones that gleam the brightest, but the ones that hold true through both darkness and light. So what lesson can we take from all of this? Drop a comment below and share your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about family justice and the unexpected ways life teaches us its most important lesson. Because in the end, this isn't just a story about a woman who tried to steal my son's future. It's about the power of community, the strength of family bonds, and the quiet courage it takes to stand up for what's right, even when doing so means taking the harder path. Those pearls still sit in my china cabinet, but now they tell a different story. They're no longer just a family heirloom. They're a reminder that sometimes the most precious things we can pass down to our children aren't things at all, but the wisdom to recognize true value when they see it, and the courage to fight for it when they find it. And that, my friends, is worth more than all the pearls in the world. A year to the day after Sarah's sentencing, I stood at the front of my old third-grade classroom, now retired but invited as a guest speaker. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent 35 years teaching children about right and wrong, never imagining I'd become the subject of one of life's hardest lessons. Mrs. Thompson, a little girl in the front row, raised her hand. Is it true you helped catch a real-life bad guy? If you've ever had to explain complicated adult situations to children, leave a comment below. Sometimes their simple perspective helps us see things more clearly. I touched the pearls at my neck. Yes, I'd started wearing them again, and smiled. Sometimes I said, the scariest monsters aren't the ones hiding under your bed. They're the ones hiding behind friendly smiles. The children leaned forward, captivated. Their teacher, Miss Martinez, another one of my former students, gave me an encouraging nod. She'd been teaching her class about community heroes, and somehow my story had made it into the curriculum. But how did you know she was bad? A boy in the back asked. Did she look mean? No, honey, I replied. She looked just like anybody else. That's why we have to judge people by their actions, not their appearances. Like when someone tells you they're your friend but takes your things without asking. Like Jimmy with my crayons, a little girl interrupted, pointing accusingly at her classmate. The class erupted in giggles, and I felt that familiar warmth that only teaching can bring. Some lessons never change, whether you're dealing with stolen crayons or stolen futures. Later that afternoon, Marcus picked me up from the school. His foundation had grown, helping dozens of families affected by similar schemes. He'd even started working with banks to create better fraud detection systems. You know, Mama, he said, as we drove, Sarah's case inspired new legislation. They're calling it the Pearl Law, making it easier to track patterns of marriage fraud and suspicious deaths. I fingered the pearls at my neck, thinking about how something so small could create such big ripples. Your grandmother would be proud, I said. She always said pearls were formed by irritation, beauty from adversity. Yue pulled up to my house, but Marcus didn't turn off the engine. There's something else, he said, suddenly serious. Remember Claire, the woman I introduced you to? How could I forget? The quiet librarian who'd asked about the pearls' history rather than trying to claim them. What about her? I'm thinking of asking her to marry me, he said quickly, like ripping off a band-aid. But I wanted to talk to you first, about doing it right this time. For those who believe in second chances, sometimes they come wrapped in wisdom bought at a high price. I turned to face my son fully. Tell me about her family, I said. Her background, her dreams. For the next hour we sat in his parked car while he shared everything he knew about Claire. Her student loans from library science school, her volunteer work with literacy programs, her close relationship with her siblings, all the things he'd never bothered to learn about Sarah before rushing to the altar. She wants a small wedding, he finished, with family, real family. I reached over and squeezed his hand. Then let's do it right. The next few months were a whirlwind of proper wedding planning, Claire included me in everything: dress shopping, venue visits, even asked me to help design the invitations. But what touched me most was her request one Sunday afternoon. "Miss Thompson," she said. She still called me that despite my insistence on Rosie. "Would you consider letting me wear your pearls for the wedding? I know their history now, and what they represent to your family. I'd be honored to be part of that story." I found myself crying happy tears this time as I clasped the necklace around her neck. They looked different on her somehow, not like a trophy to be claimed, but a tradition to be treasured. The wedding is next month, small, just like they wanted, in my backyard where peach trees are starting to bloom. Those same trees that witnessed the beginning of Sarah's deception will now see the start of something genuine. But here's what really matters. What I want all of you watching to understand: life's greatest tests often come disguised as ordinary moments. It's not always about dramatic courtroom scenes or hidden evidence. Sometimes it's about paying attention to the quiet warnings, trusting your instincts, and being brave enough to act on them. So tell me in the comments, what signs have you ignored that you wish you'd heeded? What quiet voices were you too busy to hear? Because sometimes the best stories aren't about the disasters we survive, but about how we rebuild afterward. How we learn to trust again, to love again, to believe in the goodness of people while staying wise to the ways of the world. And these pearls, they'll keep telling our family story generation after generation, not just about the time we almost lost everything, but about how we found something better: truth, wisdom, and the kind of love that doesn't need to be tested to be true. Stay tuned and subscribe for more stories about life's unexpected lessons, because sometimes the best teachers aren't the ones standing at the front of a classroom. They're the experiences that shape us, and the wisdom to learn from them. The morning of Marcus and Claire's wedding dawned clear and bright, the Georgia sun painting my backyard in shades of gold. As I stood at my kitchen window watching the early light catch the dew on the peach blossoms, I couldn't help but compare this day to that terrible afternoon a year and a half ago when my cobbler shattered on Marcus's deck. My phone buzzed, a news alert. Sarah's appeal had been denied, final and absolute. She would spend the rest of her life behind bars, her web of deception permanently unraveled. I closed the notification, refusing to let her shadow touch this day. If for those who believe in karma, share your thoughts below. Sometimes justice moves in mysterious ways, but it always arrives right on time. Claire arrived early, before the other guests. She found me in my bedroom, standing before my vanity mirror with the pearl necklace in my hands. "May I?" she asked softly, taking the necklace and moving behind me. As she fastened the clasp, our eyes met in the mirror. "Something borrowed," she smiled, "but also something true. I would wear them for the ceremony, then pass them to Claire during the recit. A proper transition, witnessed by family and friends. The way things should be done." Marcus had insisted on having the ceremony in my backyard rather than a fancy venue. "This is where the truth came out, Mama," he'd said. "Let's make it where new beginnings start too." The spot where Sarah had once sat with her fraudulent papers was now transformed into an arch of peach blossoms and white roses. The deck where my cobbler had shattered had been refinished, ready for its first dance. Sometimes healing means reclaiming spaces that hold difficult memories. As guests began to arrive, I noticed familiar faces among them. Detective James Wilson, Betty from the bank, even some of the families from Sarah's previous cases who'd become dear friends through our shared experience. They weren't just guests, they were witnesses to our family's journey from deception to truth. "Mrs. Thompson," Detective Wilson greeted me, looking sharp in his suit. "Quite a different gathering from the last time we met. James, you haven't been my student for 30 years. Call me Rosie." He grinned, that same boyish smile I remembered from 3rd grade. "Old habits die hard, Mrs. Thompson. By the way, there's something you should know." He lowered his voice. "The Pearl Law passed unanimously yesterday. Your story helped change things. You're still teaching in your way. If you've ever wondered whether your struggles might help others, drop a comment below. Sometimes our hardest moments become stepping stones for positive change." The ceremony itself was everything Sarah's secret wedding wasn't: open, joyful, surrounded by love and truth. When Marcus and Claire exchanged vows, their words weren't just promises. They were declarations backed by months of honest conversation and careful consideration. During the reception, I found myself sitting with Betty, watching the couples dance on the deck. "Remember that morning when I showed you those bank statements?" she asked, sipping her champagne. "I was so worried about telling you. You risked your job to save my son." "That's not something I'll ever forget." Anan hides. "Yeah, we're pretend." She patted my hand. "That's what community means, Rosie. We look out for each other. Besides," she chuckled, 30 years of free math tutoring for my kids. I'd say I still owe you know. The sun was setting when Claire came to find me, her eyes bright with happy tears. "It's time," she said. "These pearls," I began, my voice carrying across the suddenly quiet yard, "have seen 3 generations of love stories. Some true, some false. They've been stolen and recovered, lost and found. But today, they find their rightful home." As I fastened them around Claire's neck, I added softly, "They carry our family's wisdom now. Wear them with love, but also with watchfulness. Let them remind you that true love doesn't need to rush or hide or deceive. It grows stronger in the light of truth." Marcus wrapped his arm around his new wife, and I saw in his eyes that he understood. Sometimes our hardest lessons become our greatest gifts to pass on. As the last car pulled away, I found myself alone on my porch, watching the fireflies dance where Sarah had once plotted her deceptions. Tell me in the comments, what family heirlooms carry your own stories of wisdom and warning? What lessons do you hope to pass down through the generation? 'Cause in the end, this story isn't just about pearls or fraud or justice. It's about how we choose to move forward after betrayal, how we build something stronger from the broken pieces, and how we transform our wounds into wisdom for those who come after us. Subscribe for more stories about family truth and the unexpected ways life teaches us to be both loving and wise. Because sometimes the most precious inheritance we can leave isn't the jewelry we pass down, but the lessons we learn along the way. And those pearls, they'll keep telling our story, adding new chapters with each generation. But now they speak of redemption rather than deception, of love that grows in truth rather than hides in shadows. That's a legacy worth protecting, one pearl of wisdom at a time. 2 years after Marcus and Claire's wedding, I sat in my sunroom, surrounded by photo albums and memories. My peace lilies were blooming, their white flowers a stark contrast to the old newspaper clippings I'd kept about Sarah's case. The Pearl Law had already helped identify 3 similar schemes in other states, saving countless families from the pain we'd endured. The doorbell rang, Claire's special knock followed by Marcus's voice. They'd been acting mysterious lately, insisting on Sunday dinner at my house instead of their new place across town. As I opened the door, I noticed Claire's hand resting on her stomach, and my teacher's instinct for reading body language kicked in immediately. If you've ever had a moment when you knew something wonderful before it was announced, share your experience in the comments below. "Mama," Marcus said, his face glowing with that same excitement I'd once mistaken during his announcement about Sarah. But this time, the joy was pure and true. "You're going to be a grandmother." And when For those keeping track of our story, this moment was exactly what Sarah had tried to steal, not just Marcus's wealth, but our family's future itself. Claire reached for the pearls at her neck. She'd taken to wearing them on special occasions. "We wanted you to be the first to know," she said. "And we have a request." They sat me down in my favorite chair, the afternoon light streaming through the window. Marcus held Claire's hand as she continued. "If it's a girl, we'd like to name her Rose. After you." "Tell me everything," I said, and for the next hour they shared their hopes, their plans, their dreams for this new little life. Later that evening, after they'd gone home, I found myself pulling out my old teaching journal. 35 years of lessons, not just about reading and arithmetic, but about watching, learning, protecting. I'd taught hundreds of children to recognize truth from lies, kindness from manipulation. Now, I'd have the chance to pass those lessons to my own grandchild. For those who believe teaching never really ends, you understand that every experience becomes a lesson to share. I thought you should hear this from me first. Sarah was found unresponsive in her cell last night. My hands gripped the phone tighter. She's alive," he assured me. "But they found letters, dozens of them. She'd been corresponding with someone on the outside, someone who matches the pattern we've been tracking through the Pearl Law." I sank into my kitchen chair. "She was training someone else." "Yes," James confirmed. "But here's the thing. Because of your case, because of the law it inspired, we caught it early. Another family was saved from going through what you did. Sometimes our hardest moments become protection for others. That evening I hosted an impromptu dinner, not just Marcus and Claire but Betty from the bank, James and several of the families who'd helped bring Sarah to justice. As we sat around my dining room table sharing stories and hope, I realized we'd created something powerful from our shared pain. A vigilant community, a network of protection. Claire touched the pearls at her neck, then gently removed them. "I think," she said, holding them out to me, "these should stay with you until the baby comes. They're not just jewelry anymore, they're a reminder, a teaching tool. Our little Rose should know their story from the beginning." As I took the necklace, its weight familiar in my hands, I thought about all the lessons these pearls would help me teach my granddaughter, about love that proves itself through actions, not just words, about the strength found in honest relationship, about the importance of trusting your instincts while keeping your heart open. We're developing programs to 2 young people about financial abuse, about recognizing manipulation. Would you consider coming out of retirement? We need someone who knows how to make hard lessons accessible. Tell me in the comments, what lessons do you wish someone had taught you about protecting your heart while keeping it open? Because that's what this journey has really been about. Not just catching a criminal or preventing fraud, but learning how to move forward with wisdom instead of fear. How to trust again after betrayal. How to turn warning signs into wisdom that protects not just ourselves, but others. The pearls now rest in my jewelry box, waiting for the day when little Rose is old enough to learn their story. They'll teach her about her grandmother who fought back with truth, her parents who found real love after false, and a community that turned tragedy into transformation. Subscribe for more stories about family resilience and the unexpected ways life brings us full circle. Because sometimes the greatest legacy we can leave isn't in the valuables we pass down, but in the values we instill and the wisdom we share. They're not just telling our story anymore. They're helping write new ones, filled with truth, strength, and the kind of love that stands up to any test. 5 years have passed since I first shared this story, and I'm sitting in my sunroom again, but this time I'm not alone. Little Rose, now 4 years old, sits at my feet, stringing plastic beads onto a thread. Her small fingers work with determination, just like her daddy's did when he was her age. "Tell me about this special necklace again, Grandma," she says, looking up at the pearls I'm wearing today. "It's become our special ritual. Every time she visits, she asks for the story, and each time I share a different lesson from it. If you're watching this and have family stories that teach important lessons, share them in the comments below. Our histories shape the future in ways we never expect." "Well, sweetheart," I begin, touching the pearls at my neck. "These pearls are like our family's guardian angels. They helped us see the truth when someone was trying to hide it. She may be too young to understand the full story of Sarah and the darkness she brought, but she's old enough to grasp the simpler truths we've distilled from it." "Is that why Mommy says we must always tell the truth?" she asks, wise beyond her years. "Exactly," I smile, remembering how Claire has embraced our family's history, using it to teach rather than hide from it. She and Marcus have built something beautiful from the ashes of what could have been disaster. Not just their strong marriage and the foundation that helps others, but this precious child who carries both our family's wisdom and its hope. For those who think the past should stay buried, remember that every scar has a lesson to teach. Just yesterday, I received another call from James Detective Wilson, though he's Chief Wilson now. The Pearl Law has helped identify and prevent over 20 cases of marriage fraud and potential harm. Sarah, still in prison, has become a case study in law enforcement training, her methods analyzed to protect future potential victims. "You know, Miss Thompson," he'd said, "your story saved lives. Not just the ones we can count, but all the ones we'll never know about because we stopped these schemes before they started." Betty from the bank retired last year, but not before establishing a fraud prevention program that's become a model for banks nationwide. She named it the Pearl Protocol, a system for identifying patterns of financial manipulation in romantic relationships. Marcus and Claire's foundation has expanded to include educational programs in schools, teaching young people about healthy relationships and financial independence. I've spoken at several of their seminars, sharing our story with audiences who need to hear that wisdom can come from wounds, and strength can grow from survival. If you've ever turned your pain into purpose, drop a comment below. Sometimes our darkest chapters become someone else's light. Rose finishes her string of beads, holding them up proudly. "Look, Grandma, I made my own pearls." As I fasten her creation around her tiny neck, remembering another necklace fastened with far different intentions. "These are beautiful, sweetheart. Do you know what?" She shakes her head, dark curls bouncing. "Because you made them with love and truth," I tell her. "Those are the only jewels that really matter." As Rose shows off her beaded creation, Claire touches the real pearls at my neck. "It's amazing," she says softly, "how something that could have destroyed our family became the very thing that made it stronger." Marcus wraps an arm around her, and I see in their easy affection all the things Sarah tried to counterfeit. Trust, respect, genuine love. "You know, Mama," he says, "Rose asked me yesterday if bad people still try to trick families like Sarah did. I told her yes, but that's why we have grandmas like you, who teach us to be wise while keeping our hearts open. Tell me in the comments, what wisdom will you pass down to protect the next generation while keeping their hearts open to love? Because that's the real legacy of these pearls now. Not just as jewelry, or even as evidence in a landmark legal case, but as a symbol of how wisdom passes from one generation to the next. How love, when it's true, stands up to scrutiny and grows stronger in the light of truth." This will be my last video sharing our story, but its lessons continue through the lives we touch, the changes we've helped create, and the wisdom we pass down. The pearl law protects others, the foundation educates them, and little Rose will grow up knowing that true love comes with both open hearts and open eyes. Subscribe to stay connected with our community of survivors and protectors, because every story shared is another pearl of wisdom added to the string. They'll keep telling their story, generation after generation, not just about the darkness we faced, but about the light we found afterward, about how a family's love, when tested by fire, can emerge stronger, wiser, and more precious than ever. Because sometimes the most valuable legacy isn't the jewelry we inherit, but the wisdom we earn, and the love we choose to pass on. That's the true story of the pearls. Not how they were almost stolen, but how they helped us save something far more precious: our family's future, our capacity to trust, and our ability to love wisely and well. And that, my friends, is worth more than all the pearls in all the world. Thank you for following this story. If you'd like to share your own experiences or lessons learned, please leave them in the comments below. Your story might help someone else recognize truth from deception and love from manipulation.